Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if you have your Sun in Aries and Pisces rising. These signs couldn't be more different. You have the first and the last signs of the zodiac in combination here. The Sun in cardinal fire, very take charge, ruled by Mars, and the ascendant, the last sign of the zodiac, ruled by Neptune, and mutable water. Fire and water are emotional, but in different ways. The fire is emotional in objective ways, just like somebody who hears a news story and they get moved because of the thought of whatever that thing is, whereas the water signs are emotional in a subjective way, meaning it's connected to their own personal experiences. And so this very emotional combination is going to be seen by others. And the Sun is definitely the core personality of an individual. However, when you are younger, and I would say before your first Saturn return, before you are in your 30s, your ascendant may dominate. And so that may be front and center. However, we have to make, I don't know if I'd say exception, but take note of the fact that these are adjacent signs, which means that in terms of personal planets, the fact that the Sun is in Aries means that the person may have personal planets in Pisces. The moon can be a personal planet, but it can be any. It's not limited to certain signs that are close to Aries and Pisces. It can be, you can have the moon in Scorpio and it can still be a personal planet. But especially Mercury, Venus, and Mars, they can be in Pisces, and then it will tip the balance more in Pisces direction. And even if the moon, let's say it's in a water sign other than Pisces, like Scorpio or Cancer, it's going to give the person a much more sensitive nature, because Aries is not a sensitive sign. Again, its ruler is Mars, and Mars is the god of war. So Aries people can sometimes be accused of being insensitive because of the nature of that sign. That doesn't mean that when we say insensitive, we're not talking about being mean necessarily. It just means that the person might not be in touch with other people's emotions. There's a very masculine nature with Aries. Aries is a masculine sign. The fire signs are masculine. And therefore, there's that tendency to kind of run roughshod over people unintentionally. I'm a Sagittarian, and I totally understand, where fire signs are coming from. It's just being very straightforward, very blunt about matters, rather than kind of tiptoeing around things, which a water sign is more want to do, because water signs, they're more indirect, because that's a feminine quality and water is feminine. So you have the masculine and feminine at play here. And I think that's a nice combination, because it can give the person, and you could say in a way, more balance, where they're not overly one thing or the other. Because Pisces on the ascendant can indicate that the person may be growing up, they were a victim. Pisces is the sign of the victim. Now, any sign can be a victim, obviously, but Pisces is, characterized this way. Probably, I have never read the definition, but I'm assuming because Pisces rules the 12th house, and the 12th house is the house of karma. And karma simply means action. That's what the word means. But it can, when we talk about an action, we also mean a reaction. And so things that have happened, maybe in past lives, which the 12th house is all about, can show up in the person's life in terms of karmic baggage. And the person may have to contend with this. Pisces being the last sign can be the old soul. So when you are an old soul, your lessons, it's like somebody who is in college versus kindergarten. The lessons may be more complex, may be more challenging, because the person has been through many lifetimes and they have acquired a great deal of wisdom. And so now they are, kind of almost at graduation point, and that's how it can show up. And it's a very interesting, I think that's another interesting dichotomy between this sun and rising sign, because you have the first sign, which is also the signs are like connected to different stages of development, and Aries is the infant, which is kind of funny in its own way, because it's the first sign, so it's the stages of life. And so it's funny because I never really remembered or retained the information about Pisces. The last 4 signs of the zodiac are called winter signs. I know that, but I've never heard of Pisces being called like an old man or old woman sign. But anyway, so you have that old soul with the young energy. And I really think that this combination can produce somebody who's quite youthful, both in terms of their behavior and in terms of their appearance, because the ascendant will definitely influence the appearance, since the first house, it's the cusp of the first house, and that's the body. It is the self, but part of that is the body. So the reason I think that Pisces rising people appear so youthful is that there's kind of a helpless quality. So a little boy or little girl, and I'd say a lost little boy or little girl quality of these signs that makes them have a very youthful appearance. And this can be something that other people really take to heart, are very, it's kind of endearing, in other words, and people may want to help such individuals. So you may come across that way. Now, Pisces being a water sign, water signs can tend to be manipulative, and this is going to be what we would call a maladaptation of that sign, meaning that the person has adapted bad behavior. And, people do this because of sometimes it's just basic survival, where they have to protect themselves. It's like a self-protective measure. And I often think of the rising sign as a defense mechanism, especially if the sun and the ascendant are very far apart in terms of how their qualities are. And the reason I say that is because if the sun and rising sign are like squaring off to one another or opposing one another, and in this case, adjacent signs can be quite different as well, they are going to be so different in presentation that it can indicate that the person is not really how they are presenting themselves. So when they were younger, they may have been one way, and then as they mature, they grow into their sun sign. And if let's say somebody does have a trine between their sun and ascendant, then there's a consistency. And maybe from a young age, that person has displayed certain characteristics that they don't need to grow into. Maybe they've always had a well-balanced kind of persona, and it has always been well received by others, and other people trust them because they see that consistency. When somebody is quite different in how they present themselves and how they really are, other people may find it very hard to relate to that person, to trust that person. I understand this because my sun is in Sagittarius and my ascendant is in Taurus, and it forms an inconjunction, which is a weird angle. And so um, other people can find it hard to kind of, it's kind of like when you're advertising when a company is advertising something, they want there to be instant recognition between the product and the marketing, representing the product. And that's, the marketing is kind of like the ascendant in a sense. I don't like when people say that the ascendant is the mask, because that implies that there's some kind of artifice, fake persona, which is not true. What can be true is what I just said, is that there may be a part of that person that they kind of like developed to protect themselves from their family of origin, maybe that in order to kind of fit into that. So, how this can manifest in that sense is if you are raised in a family where you're taught that life is difficult, and that maybe there were a lot of tragedies. I'm thinking in terms of the Pisces energy and dependency, like you did not see your parents or caretakers successful in life. And I don't mean success meaning they made a lot of money. I mean that they just were self-sufficient, that they were able to take care of themselves, and they didn't feel like they had to maybe just completely struggle. But if you saw a lot of that struggling, and you received a lot of messages about life, that life is unfair and it's tough, and we're victims because we are this, insert whatever group that the person is, whether it's race, ethnicity, social class, or social standing, or we have this kind of health condition that is passed down in our, this genetic curse, or whatever you want to call it. And by the way, I'm not saying that those things are completely false, but I'm talking about when people just kind of emphasize that as this is why I can't do things in life. You will likely grow into, at some point, into that Aries can-do spirit. And you will kind of shrug that off or cast that off. Okay, and that is really great, because I don't want to characterize Pisces as a sign in an overtly negative way. However, I do think that there's a lot about Pisces that is challenging, and certainly if you read about Pisces and its ruler Neptune, you will see that there's, some of that is prejudice, but there's a lot written that is not complimentary towards Pisces. But one of the things about Pisces is that it is otherworldly and it's spiritual. And this is kind of that aura that you may, your whole life, kind of impart on others, that can be very glamorous and, of course, mystical, but dreamy. And so that can give off a certain charisma. And photography is ruled by Neptune. So a person can be very photogenic, which simply means that when they are captured on film, it comes across very well. They may not even look that great in real life, but for some reason, there's some magic that occurs with, a natural filter with photography. And I think it's because maybe photography is magical, and I think photography is magical. I notice it fills in spaces that, when you look at something in real life and then you see it on film, it seems like it's its own entity or something. It's hard for me to articulate that. So you have that, and you have this warrior energy, and you could say, wow, that person must be like split personality or something like that. Like, they're very aggressive, but then they can come across as very weak or very yielding, if you will. And I think that there is some truth to that, but I think, again, that it's going to be more, you're going to have to look at the person's other place, personal planets to see, if it tips the balance in one direction or another. And then also look at the sun and ascendant in terms of the, possible aspects, because you might not realize this, but you can have an out of sign conjunction. So if somebody has, let's say, their Pisces is their ascendant is 28 Pisces, and their sun is 2 degrees of Aries, that could be a conjunction in the first house, and it could be, Aries rules the first, so it might come across more fiery because it's a late degree Pisces ascendant. So the person might be more feisty and more assertive. Usually Pisces people, if you have your ascendant in Pisces, you may be very like live and let live, and not necessarily, throwing your weight around when it comes to trying to get people to do things, and so on and so forth. And that will be exacerbated if your Mars is in Pisces as well. Or you could say if it's in Taurus or something like that, another feminine sign, where it might be, but Taurus, it'll definitely be more stubborn and willful. So I would say, especially if it's in Pisces, it will be very yielding. And you will give off a gentle aura. Again, if it is in conjunction with the sun, it's going to heat that up, and it will be more like Aries. Aries is a very overpowering sign. So when you have this combination, it could very well be, especially if Mars is in Aries, that it overpowers that Pisces ascendant, and people may be like, you're a Pisces ascendant, but that might show up in certain ways. Like I said, the person may appear very vulnerable when younger and get more feisty as they get older. But I would say that in general, regardless, that people may be shocked at how courageous you are, and how you can be assertive and all of that jazz, because they're getting that gentle preview, but they have to stay around for the actual show to see what's really going on there. I feel that this combination can be very, you're ruled by Neptune. You can say you're ruled by your sun sign too, your Mars, but I would say that this combination may be very intuitive in this sense. I don't consider any sign can be intuitive, or any human being can be intuitive, but specifically concerning, the way that the person experiences the connection to the unseen world and forces. I feel that, Pisces is the most overtly psychic sign. I feel that Aries people can make gut check decisions. Very, that they tend to be very fast thinkers and stuff like that. And that can, I feel like this combination can be very good for that because you can feel into it, being ruled by Neptune, but at the same time, you might be a quick thinker, especially if Mercury is in Aries, and make these snap decisions that work in your favor. When I think of professions, I think of the for the sun sign, and in these types of readings, I'm mostly focused on the way that the person carries themselves versus what kind of professions. But I do talk about them as well as relationship tendencies, even though there are other factors that will definitely be involved. And with Aries, being ruled by Mars, the professions that are associated with are anything that is kind of dangerous, that the person has to make those snap decisions. So law enforcement and the military are ones that come to mind right away. However, with Neptune rising, with Pisces rising and Neptune on the ruler, you may be kind of adverse to that because you're going to have a sensitivity that may not be able to do those kinds of things. People who have Pisces rising are natural empaths. So that can mean that any kind of environment that's very unpeaceful, that can throw you off big time. So certainly a war zone, and by the way, I'm American, some of our urban centers are war zones at times, unfortunately, or they can seem like that sometimes, not all the times. So that may not be something that is your cup of tea. However, I could be totally wrong about that. Again, if your Mars is in Aries, because your Mars is your sense of urgency and what you feel like you have to do. And in Aries, you may feel like you need to be in the battle. And even if it's not, you just may feel like you have to do this. And there's a self-sacrificial quality about Pisces. So a person with Pisces rising sometimes may have a Christ complex, like, yes, I'm a sacrificial lamb, or I'm going to go into, I'm not going to just get drafted. I'm going to volunteer in this military battle because I want to help others. And I mean, this is me injecting my own personal feelings on that, but sometimes I think that people do those things, and this is why I do think that it's so terrible. One of the reasons that war is so terrible is because people genuinely want to help, and so they enlist, or they they sign up, in other words, and it could be a deceptive situation where it's really not what it's presented as. But that's a thing. I think this combination does have a tendency to be gullible in general. And one of the ways that this can play out is that one of the reasons that I think this is because when you're talking about Pisces, you're talking about somebody who believes the best in others and is, very easily moved to sympathy. And then you have the person who is the Aries person, who tends to be very generous, and fire signs in general tend to be very positive, and so they're going to also maybe believe the best in other people. But there's I think that there's a kind of a guileless quality about Aries because it's the first sign. So it is that childlike nature. But also, Aries people tend to kind of neglect details. They're looking at the future, the bigger picture, and they might not be analyzing things too carefully, and they could fall prey to somebody who is trying to get something from them. So whether that is in love or in business, this kind of person might be an easy mark. So whether, you might go into some sort of, I think, I think this combination can go into something that is connected with social welfare, making the world a better place, because this is a very idealistic combination. And Aries loves to champion the underdog. And sometimes Pisces feels like the underdog. So you have that combination, and the person knows what it feels like, and they are going to be that warrior. That's what Aries really is about. And you might work in social justice reform, or maybe even like a teacher in the inner city. This can be somebody who has great leadership abilities, and also because Aries is in the sun position, that can lead to a lot of ambition and drive. Well, that is, I guess, what ambition is. But like I said, somebody who is in the position of authority. And so even like as a mentor and that sort of thing, that could be something like a teacher. Or I also think this is a great combination for someone who wants to be like a life coach, because you may have had early experiences that were very challenging that you overcame, and you could be an inspiration to others. And there's like the natural coach with Aries people and all cardinal signs, but I think Aries is the quintessential coach. And the thing about it is that with Pisces rising, you have an intuitive ability to read people. So you would know how to talk to one person versus the other. Because one of what I would call the shortcomings of Aries is sometimes that lack of insight, and it's not because of lack of intelligence or anything like that, but the person isn't really tuning in. They're so much in the moment, and they're so active physically. There's like almost like a hyperactive quality with Aries as a sign, that they're not really, meditation, we tend to think of meditation as sitting still and tuning in like an antenna does. But, Aries is like in constant motion. And so it's just kind of like doing. But this is a great combination because you have that contemplative side that can help you to kind of access the higher information, and then you have the ability to take action on it. There's this phrase, navel gazing, the term that is the person who's always kind of like in that meditative state, but they're not really doing anything with it. And, if you believe that you came here to accomplish certain things, then you're going to love this idea of being in motion and going after it, but you don't want to be spinning your wheels either. You want to have like a very clear vision of what it is that you want. And sometimes people just think that if they throw things against the wall, they're going to it'll eventually land. And I do think that action is great. I think people who tend to take action, even if it's messy action, as they call it, will be successful in their endeavors because they're not just talking about it. So, in terms of love, I feel that this is a very romantic combination. And again, I feel like the person can get bamboozled in love because you can fall in love very quickly. Aries is a very like impatient sign, cut to the chase. But I don't know, there's another word. I don't like to say impatient because that has a negative connotation. I mean, sometimes it's perfectly legitimate or rash, doing things too unthinkingly, if that's a word. Um, Spontaneous, maybe that's what I'm looking at. And so, or immediate, there's an immediacy with Aries where they're living in that moment like a child lives in the moment. Aries has a very strong inner child, and look to the moon sign because that will also play into it, of how the person's personality is expressed and their emotions are expressed. And, but yes, it can be very romantic, but easily duped, especially because I feel that Aries is a very lusty sign. I think Pisces can be very lusty, to be honest with you, but in an imaginative sort of way, I guess I would put it. But this combination, you might be too attracted to the physical, and then you get played. Or you just have a one-dimensional relationship and think you're madly in love with someone. Because Mars, the ruler of Aries, can be the libido. And so that can tend to direct a person versus, you could say like with Pisces, Venus is exalted in Pisces, and it's the epitome of unconditional love. But the word shit show came into my mind because if you have this combination with Venus and Pisces, you may find that love is something that you have to, it's kind of a minefield sometimes because you may fall in love with the wrong person at times. I don't feel that even though Venus is exalted in Pisces, I think because it happens to be Pisces, that it can still be problematic, definitely. And you have to be a very good judge of character to be able to know, like, who is right for you and who isn't. Because your sympathies are so easily aroused. And, it's hard for Pisces to be able to differentiate between feeling sorry for someone and caring for them. Sympathizing with someone and allowing them into their inner circle. When you feel sorry for someone, especially if that person has, kind of presented themselves in that sort of way, that can certainly be a sign that they might be trying to manipulate. And that can mean that the person is trying to get something from you. And I think I touched upon this earlier. You have to be careful not to manipulate. Sometimes, the person with this combination, maybe they don't have as strong a sun. Maybe their sun is very afflicted. And so they may try to fall back on their ascendant and their ability to manipulate to try to get what they want. So you want to make sure if you feel in life that you are an underdog and you feel like you have been a victim in life, I'm not saying that you haven't been, but be very careful about trying to manipulate other people and make them feel sorry for you to get what you want, because that just promotes dependency. And that is the shadow side of Pisces, is dependency. And you want to grow into your sun sign, which is all about self-sufficiency. Aries being a cardinal fire sign. And I think about the King of Wands in the tarot. I don't know if it's connected to a particular fire sign, but I think of it as that sort of the divine masculine, the captain of your own ship, where you are calling the shots. And that is going to be the greatest feeling that you can have. You want respect. You don't want pity in life. And this combination can be very strong when the person is dedicated to those kinds of ideals. Okay, that's what I have for you. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you would like a personal reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.